Ladies and gents, what's
All
going on
right.
in the world?
Welcome back to Tribe of Philosophy Club. Woo! How's it going, everybody? This is our weekly meeting. If you haven't been here before, you should definitely come to the actual Discord server. You're watching on the stream. Go to discord.gg/triba to participate in this engaging conversation with Garrett Dailey, our Chief Philosophy Officer and Branding Specialist. He's the guy who's made all the Tribe stuff that you see around, or most of it. So yeah, you can ask him anything. He's a professional philosopher. Pretty awesome. Ion
Profe-
Enterprises, if you want to learn more.
Professional is loose terms, but
Professional is
uh,
very loose, but
is
welcome everybody
is anyone
else.
is anyone really a professional philosopher? It's a better question. Is
I
is
th-
philosophy even a profession?
I think the only way you can actually be a professional philosopher is if you're a cult leader or like a church leader or something, like or a
Yeah, maybe.
theologian or something.
Well, theologians would be theologians technically. Theology, while I would say it's a subset of philosophy, is not exactly the same thing.
What's the difference? Because I never really thought about it,
What's the
honestly.
difference? Um, Well, theology specifically like concerned with religion, and I would say like you have three things that are friends but are different, which would be like theology, philosophy, and religion. Or sorry, theology, philosophy, and ideology, right? Where philosophy is explicitly religious, ideology is not explicitly religious, and oftentimes in the modern world are non-religious, but they function like one. And then philosophy kind of isn't necessarily and if you do philosophy right, it shouldn't be an ideology, and philosophy doesn't necessarily is not necessarily religious. There's a lot of secular philosophy. So if you have like philosophy that's totally religious would be theology. Philosophy that is totally non-religious, with some exceptions. I guess there are some religious ideologies, but I would say if they're religious they would fall under theology. If they're not, they would fall, or if they're religious they fall under theology. If they're not, they fall under ideology. Philosophy probably contains um, theology and ideology, but that might be splitting hairs. I don't know. Probably, I don't know if people would agree with that definition, um, but yeah, no. So let's see. We have a lot of new people.
Yeah, welcome guys. Let's just give a shout out to our new members. Blake here. Blake is here.
Like is here.
Kamal's been to one of these before. We also have Samantha BU, and Clarifications is coming back. Doesn't make it to the mental health, but comes for philosophy. What's that saying? We're not going to read into that.
Well, you know
So
what? Just for your information, Sam, I'm only on here for a couple of minutes. I got to see my man Garrett, right? Got to see
It's
Garrett.
true. It's
uh,
true. I won't take offense at
good to
that,
see you
Clara.
too, Clara.
Yeah, we miss you. We definitely miss you. It's good to hear your voice. I'm glad you hopped on, even if you can't be here for a long time. I always love hearing your voice. BU said we miss
Likewise,
you.
likewise. Thank you.
So let's talk
Does
today
anyone remember what the
about
topic was last week that we were going to talk about this
no, no one,
week?
no one ever
BU's got an
remembers.
insane memory. I bet BU remembers.
I feel like a cool skit would be is if we just pull up the Chat GPT and we just ask it philosophical questions and then we make it fight Garrett.
Oh my god.
The whole.
Let's try
Ooh,
that.
wait. No, let's do it. Let's do it. I'm down. Ball, pull it up.
All right, I'll
Tabala,
pull it.
That's some cool
Pull,
stuff.
pull
Tabala
it up,
just.
Jamie. Let's. No, this sounds like an awesome idea. I'm down.
It's
We'll
gonna
do
be
the
good.
philosophy of AI, I guess. So I
Can we do AI art afterwards? I keep going back to that.
maybe. So in the time that I've been here, I've already, and I mean like literally in the last week and a half, I've already had like 2 or 3 major discussions about the philosophy of AI with people out here. The first time was at the crypto meetup last Sunday, and it was like two dudes that were totally convinced consciousness is an illusion, which, if you have ever been here before, you know is like my least favorite opinion in the world. And then last night, there's a guy who's an AI researcher, and we just had a good conversation about AI because he was obviously better informed than those guys were. But um, so um, one of the things before we get into this with Tabala and GPT, the one of the central problems when people are thinking about AI is that generally they don't understand how it works at all, right? Um, so
Yeah, that's true.
you could say like yeah, at the simplest level, all computer programs are input and output, right? You can tell, at the lowest possible level, you have machine language, which is, like binary and stuff. There are transistors in a chip that turn on and off. They're either letting an electron through or not letting an electron through, right? And from that, you can build up into things like Boolean logic, Boolean operators, which are like if-then statements, either-or statements, that kind of stuff. But no matter how far down you go, it's like input output. It's a machine. It is a tool, right? So one of the problems with the reason why people think AI can be conscious is because people don't really understand how human consciousness works at all. And what I mean by that is there's a really common issue. Even in one of my psychology classes I took in college, they presented it like this, which is people think the brain is like a computer, which is a little bit silly because the brain was here much longer than computers. So if anything, computers are like a imitation of the brain, but not really that much. So when you say the brain is like a computer, what you're doing is taking human consciousness out of the equation. A lot of people nowadays think consciousness isn't real, or it's an illusion, or we live in a simulation, because as a result of the fact that computers are so widespread, and technology is so widespread and so powerful, that the prevailing kind of worldview of the day is that everything is like this thing that we're looking at. We're all thinking about tech. We're all, we have phones in our pockets and computers on our desk. So because that's our primary metaphor, we think, oh, everything must work like a computer. And it doesn't really.
I want to add 2 comments here. So George Hotz actually ran a poll. Who those don't know him, he's kind of a famous guy in the computer security and programming world. He's also leading the search, enhancing the search functionality at Twitter for Elon. But he did a poll. He said, how many GPUs is the human brain? And it was like 1 to 10, 10 to 100, or like 1,000 plus. And at least, some of all the smart people that engage that and kind of around that network, it was clearly like, hey, if we had to put a number on it, it's probably like several thousand. It's probably somewhere between like exaflops or petaflops of data. For those who don't know, exabyte is, and a petabyte, you're talking about it's basically the level up from terabyte and up, in terms of processing. But another element that's interesting just in our conscious experience is that we can only process 60 bits per second. And I put this tweet in kind of this experiment they did on the bandwidth of consciousness,
I
human
saw that.
consciousness.
That was a good thing.
Of like how it can only do 60 bits per second. So all these are very fascinating to me. And at least for like in the frame of Garrett, I've been thinking a lot about it because I've been thinking, how do I refine my product and my community and my messaging to like understand these problems? Because it's so easy to overload someone and then they're disengaged, so you have to be mindful of it.
I would even say too, if it's a 60 bits per second, that's got to vary from person to person wildly. Like, and I would say that processing power, both from like just total amount of data input towards utility, is probably it probably correlates with IQ, and that might actually be very similar to what IQ is measuring, right? So one of the things that people don't think about a lot, when you are a baby, when you're an infant, right, your brain is receiving all sensory data equally, right? So your vision, your taste, touch, smell, sound, all these things are exactly the same to your brain. So babies try to put things in their mouth. They're smelling things. They're touching everything, right? Their brain has not learned to weight, or like assign more significance to one type of input over others. It's just, and that's the thing. Like, people think, I don't know that people think about this, but the way that we kind of act like we act like the senses are totally independent, but your brain is actually receiving all of this sensory data. Like, if you had 5 different pipes that are feeding into like the sewer line, right? Like all of that is actually going into your brain.
Stream. It's more of like a stream
and
than
it's not differentiated, right? Like your brain before you're mature does not know the difference between sight, sound, all these things. An interesting example of this, if you ever have a person who is blind as a child that gains sight later, which is rare, but like who is like not like permanently blind, basically, then if they don't gain sight in that specific window where you can learn how sight works, then they will be able to see, but they will not be able to do anything with that information at all. They won't have like the ability to understand what things are different. They won't have depth perception. They won't like, they'll be able to see, but it's not helpful because their brain hasn't programmed in their like, it hasn't like wired in what sight does and how it
It's the
works.
neurons. You're talking about the neurons that fire and wire together.
Yeah, basic. Because so this is human experience, as opposed to I have to imagine that like other forms of like mammalian life and even other forms of life don't have the same sort of conceptual consciousness that we have. And what does that mean? The best example I can give of this is a tree, right? When I say tree, there is the word tree, which is not a tree, right? The word tree, when I say it, refers to the concept tree. The concept tree is like a cluster of a bunch of different things. So you have in your brain all of the sensory data from all of the trees that you've ever seen in your life, right? You probably don't remember the finer points of this. Your brain filters a lot of stuff out, but it's technically in there somewhere. It's just maybe not able to be recalled. So you can imagine, if I say, think of a tree, you're going to imagine a tree that doesn't exist. So you have this visual concept of a tree. Maybe I say, imagine how a Christmas tree smells, or imagine how like sap smells, or how a tree, bark feels. And there's a lot of different kinds of bark on a bunch of different trees. But when I say tree, you have a personal, private, specific image or concept of a tree that is unlike anyone else's, right? If Tabalo, whatever he's conjuring up in his head, his idea of a tree is totally different from mine, even though we all agree that there's a tree outside my window that you guys can't see. If I point at that, we can all say, this here tree's a tree, right? So there's
that accent was
and
the best part about that.
did you ever see Christmas Story when they go shopping for Christmas trees and he's like giving them the shittiest tree in the world? So you have concepts in your brain are these attachments of lots of little like nodes of different kinds of data. You have the word, you have the image, you have the smell, the sound, the taste, the feeling, right? And so because we have this kind of conceptual understanding, like when you have there's a great philosopher named Plato. He had this idea of what he called the forms, where in Plato's universe, there is a perfect idealized version of a thing. Like there's a perfect tree that exists in like a metaphysical space. And that tree projects into reality in the form of the trees that you see, right? I don't think this is true, but what I think he was actually talking about is this concept of a tree that you have in your head, and you project that concept onto all the trees that you interact with. You can project this concept onto like one of those little air freshener trees, just in the same way that you can to a real tree or a bonsai tree or a plastic Christmas tree, which is technically not, a plastic Christmas tree has nothing in common with a Christmas tree in reality. It's metal and plastic and rubber or whatever other kind of components it has. It has literally nothing like a tree except that it looks like one, and we pretend that it's one because that concept is the same for all of them, right? So this is really critical to understand, because if you have this, there's an observer, which will, is what we call consciousness, which consciousness, people think it's a lot of different things, right? People think consciousness is memory, but animals have memory and they don't have human self-reflective consciousness. Animals can, sufficient, not all dogs, but smart dogs, if they look in a mirror, can realize that they are their reflection, right? And kids develop this relatively early on. It's self-awareness, right? They realize that is me. But not all animals can do this. Smart ones can. Not all dogs even. There's a huge variability between like dog intelligence. Like there's smart breeds. Herding breeds are very smart.
Golden
some dogs are very dumb.
retrievers.
Yeah. So excellent. So that's a thing that isn't technically like part of consciousness. It has something to do with it. My definition is consciousness is just the thing that has the experience of being. That the thing that when you say I, you're talking about the watcher in your brain. Like if you close your eyes and you put a blanket over your head and you're in a sensory deprivation tank and you have no stimuli, it's pitch black, it's silent. All the water is the same temperature as your air, which is the same temperature as your skin. You can't feel your body or anything. There's no smell. Then whatever you're experiencing, the thing that listens to thoughts, right? The thing that looks out of your eyes, that thing is consciousness, right? Isness, I think, is the best definition, but it's kind of confusing. The thing that has the experience of being, right? And so AI, regardless of whether we can program it to do all of these other things, we can program it to take data and spit it back out. We can make algorithms that are, basically the thing that makes it AI and not a normal program is that you have algorithms that train on data and it makes predictions, and it either, you have different like variations of the model. So let's say we have an algorithm that we're going to train on pictures of trees, and it's saying, hey, make a tree out of this. Well, you run it and you run 1,000 versions of it, and whichever one does the best, you take that one and you mutate it and you run that one 1,000 times, and you keep doing this. And eventually, if you have enough pictures for it to look at, it can spit out basically things that look like trees. But inside of that program, there is no observer. There is no isness. There's no consciousness. And no matter how complicated you make it, that thing will never come into existence. You can't make that happen. Humans don't have to do something for consciousness to show up. You just slowly realize as you're getting older, you're like, I have a self. I am this thing. I have an ego, and I have likes and dislikes and experiences, and I can reflect on these and change the way that I act. And so when people think about AI as like a machine that can improve itself and learn and all these things, it's actually people that they're thinking about. Not all people do this. There are some people that make the same mistakes over and over again for their entire lives, right? But if you realize this about yourself, that you can observe yourself and change your programming, right? Again, I really don't like using AI metaphors for people. It should be the other way around, but we're talking about AI. Then you can improve yourself. You can teach yourself how to learn things better. You can teach yourself how to like speak better or dress better, and these things all improve your quality of life. And most people don't do that. Most people do what they're taught. So I would, we think we're going to have computers
Garrett, I
that can
approve
think.
that message.
Well, yeah, people think we're going to have computers that can think, but we don't even have people that can think. Like people can technically think, but like a lot of people don't at all in a meaningful way, right? Most people do what they're told. They do what they were raised to do or trained to do. If they work at a job, someone teaches them how to do it and they do it exactly like that. So we're trying to, simulate this thing that's not even common in people. But everyone has consciousness. They just don't like realize that that's a meaningful, important thing. Are some humans AI? No, it would be the other. It'd be like,
We're natural intelligence, so there's a difference in just how you describe it. Because artificial, you're saying it's not natural, basically.
yes. However, I would say that like when humans start becoming this kind of like self-reflexive, self-improving kind of person versus a normal person, that's almost artificial in the. I mean, you could say technically AI was created by people and people are natural, so that's natural too. I wouldn't necessarily argue with that, but usually we draw this distinction being that things that people make are artificial and things that people don't make aren't, right? Which is kind of silly because technically humans are a part of nature, so everything that we do is probably has something to do with some natural law that we're just unaware of, right?
All right, so to set the baseline on the AI's philosophy, I asked it just two basic questions, and Garrett, I want to get your feedback on it. So I asked it, what is the meaning to life? Meaning of life is a question that has puzzled philosophers and theologians for centuries, and one that likely does not have a single definitive answer. Different people may have different answers to this question depending on their beliefs, values, and experiences. Some people may believe that the meaning of life is to seek happiness. Others may believe that is to fulfill a specific purpose or destiny, and still others may believe that there's no inherent meaning to life and that is up to each individual to create their own meaning. Ultimately, the meaning of life is a deeply personal question that each person must answer for themselves. That's a pretty good answer.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty good cop out answer, but again, the machine
Ooh,
can't.
wrecked.
This is the critical. This is where everybody gets mixed up with AI stuff. Is that what the machine is saying is a bunch of shit that a lot of other people said over the years. That's data that's available to the training model, right? So this is just a composite of a bunch of different answers that other people have said. It's not actually thinking, right? It's just the way that the code was written. The algorithm that they use is variable. So it's called, in AI, it's called a black box, which is that you can't look inside the algorithm once you write it, and the process of it works the way that it works. So they had an experiment that they did where they had two AI that talked to each other, and they eventually developed their own language that the scientists could not translate back. They couldn't understand it, so they shut it down because it scared them. And it's like, when you start running these algorithms and stuff, you can't actually look inside of it anymore. It's opaque, right? It's a black box. And so what people tend to do is they think, oh, I don't understand how this works, so I'm going to relate this thing to myself. The only way I understand it is it must be doing what I'm doing when I'm thinking. And that, I think, is a really serious mistake, right? The best example of this is not the point of the movie, but I think they nailed it without trying to. If you've ever seen Ex Machina, which is the best AI movie, really phenomenal. In Ex Machina, this guy, he's supposed to be like a Steve Jobs kind of figure. He builds an AI. He's like or Zuckerberg even. He's like some kind, like tech genius guy who becomes a recluse. He lives at this really nice house in the middle of the woods, and he builds like a sentient AI, or an AI that is convincingly human, right? It can respond to input, and it appears to reason, and all of these things. But so my concern with AI is not that we build a thinking computer, right? Because I don't think we can, right? You can build something that looks like thinking, but because you can't make consciousness, you can't build consciousness, you can't make this thing that is real start to and it's subjective and it's a part of reality. You can't make it appear no matter what. It's not just it will not come out of random code, because I don't think humans are random code, unlike AI, where it's like, hey, we run the algorithms enough that it convinces us it's conscious. There was an AI engineer at Google who like wrote this whole thing. He's like, oh my God, I made an AI and it's conscious and it needs to have rights. It's like, no, you're an idiot. Like, I'm sorry, you might be very, very smart for an idiot, but you're an idiot. That's not how anything works. That's
So,
You're
so
misunderstanding the nature of it.
a fun fact about that specific incident is apparently that AI like tried to get a lawyer to like defend on his behalf.
No way.
Yeah, yeah,
What? Just
but Garrett,
starts DMing lawyers.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate against you because I do think us as humans, we kind of have this black box reasoning aspect to our consciousness on whatever sort of the gray line is between emotion and logic of our brains. And so these AI, they're like generalized. Uh, they're basically the most generalized AI as possible, and they do learn from all that input data. But us as humans, we learn from all that input data as well. So, like, for any individual that actually has a well reasoned and sophisticated thought or analysis about a certain subject matter, usually that is only capable once they've done like appropriate due diligence about studying, learning, and obtaining knowledge or information on the subject matter that they learn from external sources. So it's like we don't learn, we're not taught Greek epistemology just like by waking up and having dreams about it, right? We're taught that down through ages. So
No,
so it's kind of that
that's
same idea.
but
Oh, we
never
lost
message
Garrett.
him. Yeah, I'm back.
So it's kind of, I guess what I'm making the argument is, as humans, articulate and formulate our answers in a same type of metacognition, is that we have inputs that program our consciousness subconsciously by nature and nurture, in which we conjure our outputs or answers as well.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to go a level deeper in my um, rationale here. So my argument, which I will say, this for me, this is my one dogmatic thing. This is my axiomatic. Axioms are things that you accept as the baseline assumptions about reality that you don't go deeper than. Right? Everyone has axioms. You don't people don't use that word a lot, but you basically in math, right, you have axioms like 1 + 1 is equals 2 is axiomatic. You assume that we all agree and we don't ask why 1 + 1 equals 2. It's an axiom. It's taken like that, right? So I have one axiomatic belief, which is that I think that I guess I'll explain the way that most people think. The standard scientific model of the universe is that there was something that we assume is the Big Bang. There are other theories, but that's the most standard accepted theory of what's going. It may not even be a full theory, right? It's not certainly not a law. It's not proven, but we assume that this is what happened. That at the beginning of time, there was a super dense singularity that exploded, um, and space time began to expand, and that was like the highest point of potential energy, right? You had everything that existed in a very hyperdense point, and it just started moving. At the end of time, there's a thing called entropy, where if I light a match, the match will burn out. It will create smoke and light and heat, and there will be a little burnt match when I get done. If I were to use the energy, produce the heat from that match, I would not be able to capture all the particles and the smoke and take back the light and the heat and put that match back together, because that match has stored potential energy in it, right? So that energy is used up. If you have a cold drink on a hot day, eventually the cold drink will reach the temperature of the surrounding room, right? If you have a hot drink on a cold day, the same thing will happen. So that is what entropy is. It's they call this the arrow of time. It moves in one direction, and you can't reverse it. That's our understanding of the second law of thermodynamics. Says, it's a one-way street. My theory, which is kind of complicated, but I'll try and explain it, is that as potential energy is getting used up, right? The universe had more potential energy, and we light matches, we light fires, we heat up stuff, cool stuff off. We're basically running it out, and we have billions or even potentially trillions of years before we run out, and the universe reaches one temperature all over, which is just cold and dead, right? I think that there's a counterforce to this called syntropy. Syntropy is what it's basically, we gain information. So if I'm Tabalo and I've lived 20,000 years ago and I'm a caveman, right? Cave Tabalo, Yeet Man. Let's say he's sitting there and he sees lightning hit a tree and the tree lights on fire, right? Okay, that's cool. We've seen somebody create fire. We know that fire is a thing. Maybe he has a stick and he puts it in the fire and lights a stick on fire, and he takes the stick home and puts more sticks on it, and he figures this out, right? Well, he doesn't know how to make the fire, but he can keep a fire going, and that would be a thing that people did. They just had fire from nature that they kept going forever until they learned how to make it. But eventually, you have a guy who's like hitting rocks together, and he can, he does this for a long time, or maybe he was even just throwing rocks and he saw a spark, and then he did it until he can make sparks again. And then he lit a fire with the spark because he realized the spark was like the fire that they've been preserving, and they figured it out. Well, that's really hard, and it takes a lot of energy to do this, but eventually you learn something about fire, right? You learn, hey, if lightning strikes, we can go light a fire and we can keep it, then we have a fire forever. You learn, hey, I can hit rocks together and I can make a fire, or I can twist sticks, which probably came later. But now we have like 3 lighters in the house, right? I could just like click it, light a fire. Very little energy is expended for me to do that, and it's all stored in the lighter. You have the fluid, you have the little flint, right? So over time, life, consciousness, right, can take energy as it's spent and learn how to do things more efficiently, right? The best example, this is not the best possible example, but this is the best example that I've thought of, is imagine we're playing Yahtzee, right? Imagine we have a universe where the only things that exist are 5 6-sided dice, right? If you've ever played Yahtzee, you roll 5 dice. If you get all of the same thing, you get a Yahtzee, right? So that is, let me do this math for you because I always forget this number. It's a weird number, but 6 times 6 times 6 times 6 times 6 is, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 46,656 possible outcomes. So at the beginning of this universe, let's say it's Yahtzee God. Yahtzee God throws the dice, right? That's the Big Bang. There's now the most possible outcomes, right? There are 46,000 and change possible ways the universe could go because it only contains 5 6-sided dice. And for the sake of this argument, each of these dice, each die will land one at a time. So let's say you have to guess right now, pick a number, a 5-digit number with digits 1 to 6, right? That you could pick, 1 1 1 1 1. You could pick 1 2 3 4 5. You could pick whatever, but it's only using those. There's no zeros and there's no numbers higher than 6. It's 1 to 6, right? If you had to guess right now, we could try this if everyone wants to guess, and we'll continue guessing and see how it works. But if you guys want to, put them in the chat. If you're watching at home, you can participate too. It'll be very easy to know if you're right or wrong. Okay? Because I'm going to actually pull up the roll dice thing on Google.
You gonna share your screen?
No, but I'll tell you what we get. Okay.
Okay. All right, guesses in chat.
I'm on my phone.
We do this in Sea of Thieves sometimes. Just pull out a 20-sided die and just roll it and guess. I never get it right.
Well, we're doing 6-sided, but let me know when you have your guesses in, and I'll tell you what we got. You can't get 7, Sam. It's a 6-sided die. Okay.
Oh man.
All right. So the first one is 3.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh, we were wrong.
Our first digit is 3. So the number of possible outcomes in this universe has just dropped from 46,000 and change to 7,776, right? Your odds at the beginning were 1 in 46,000 and change. Now your odds of guessing correctly are 7,776 because you're trying to guess the numbers in the order that they're going to come out, right? So our first number is 3. Whatever number we have at the end, it's 30,000 something, 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 right? All right, go ahead and make your second guess. I'm going to roll it again. Okay. Our number is 3 again. Good guess, the ball. So right now, the possibilities in this universe have gone down from 7,776 to 1,296, right? If we were doing this the complicated way, I would make you guess a full 5-digit number. And we can do that actually, if you want, but you're going to be totally off, right? So we know the number is 3 3 something, something, something. Technically, you're trying to guess all 5 digits in the right order, right? So I'll go ahead and roll our next one if you want to have your guesses. And if you want, you could start trying to guess the 5-digit number. Okay, let me know when you're ready. Tavallo's guessing all 3s. Okay, our third number is 3.
No way.
Taballo is batting pretty
Taballo.
high. Okay.
Killing me.
So let's go ahead. If you want to make your next guess, we can go ahead and roll that.
2.
Okay. Our number is 1. So it's 3331. Right now, mind you, we have 1 to go. So to get this last number, you have a 1 in 6 chance, meaning your guess, no matter what it is, it's going to be 3331 and a number between 1 and 6. So you have a 1 in 6% chance of getting, or a 1 in 6 chance, not a percent. It's like 18 or something percent chance. I forget. Maybe it's less than that. I'm bad at math. 12%. You have a 1 in 6 chance of getting it right. So if everyone wants to go ahead and write a number that starts 3331 and then guess a number between 1 and 6 on the end of there, we'll see how well you can guess. So give me a 5-digit number starting with 3331. Okay.
Wait. 3,
You're
1.
short a number. 3331 something. One between 1 and 6. Okay. You have the same guess as Samantha. We have 2 people have guessed 3316 or 333 and 16. 2 people have guessed 33315. That's cool. All right, we're not really covering the spread here, folks, but it's okay. Let's see what we got. 2.
I was
Last
just
number
gonna
is
put that in. I was gonna guess 2.
Okay. So here's the thing. When you think about this, you think, oh, damn, we all got it wrong. But actually, you all got it almost completely right. You got 4 out of 5 of these. And by the end of the game, you got, out of the 46,656 possible outcomes, you got within 6 of the thing, or 5 technically, right? You were very, very close and mostly right. So that's the thing. When you think about guessing games, it's like, oh, either you guessed the number or you didn't. But in reality, when we gain information out of chaos, we get mostly right. We get a lot closer to being mostly right every single time. And every time we learn more things, we get better at being very close to being right. So what my argument about the universe is actually that as energy is being spent, consciousness, or in life and then consciousness, right? So consciousness comes out of life, is actually gaining information and is getting a better and better understanding of reality over time. And that is a counterforce to entropy, because we can then make better and better predictions. We understand how the world works. We can, instead of spending 100,000 years to try and learn how to light a fire with rocks, we can just buy a lighter, right? We've figured it out so precisely that every single lighter in the world works just as well, unless you have a shitty one, right? But generally speaking, almost all lighters work almost all the time. They even have lighters that work like when they're wet. It's insane. So it's like, this is where I think AI is not ever going to be conscious, because no matter how many of these things we give it, it is only a tool for us to use, because we have consciousness and that comes out of reality. It's a part of reality. Like, consciousness is real. It can't be created, just like matter can't be created or destroyed, right? But it's something that emerges out of the way the world works, right?
So,
And go ahead.
So, I agree with what you're saying in the sense of like, okay, this is like a silicon system, not a carbon system like us. But how do you attribute consciousness, right? Because, like, say if you ask the Pope, they're like, oh, they barely said dogs go to heaven. Like what? Well, I can't remember when. Or if you ask whoever, they're gonna say, oh no, trees aren't only humans have it. Like,
So
is a tree conscious? And what would make a tree more conscious than a machine?
yeah, I think that the reality itself has some baseline level of consciousness. So when we're thinking about the dice, right? When the first die falls, you only get slightly more right, right? So if you're thinking about this in the timeline of like all, because the game of Yahtzee that we're playing with the universe is a game of Yahtzee with I don't know, trillions of dice with hundreds of sides or even, millions of sides, right? So the number of variables, the amount of energy, the amount of possible outcomes is so high that it is not comprehensible in a meaningful way. We couldn't even make up numbers that big, right? But it's those giant numbers we can't imagine multiplied by maybe exponentially by other giant numbers we can't imagine. It's a stupid amount of data, right? But that's the thing. Your consciousness, like that's what Tabala was saying earlier, your consciousness is actually taking in so much information all the time. Like you're processing stuff that your brain's not even comprehending because your brain is actually filtering out stuff to get down to what's useful, right? So you could roll all these dice. Some of these dice don't matter. Like, what does it matter where the grains of sand are arranged on Pluto, right? It does not matter at all. That is completely irrelevant. You never need to know that. It's not going to impact your life in a meaningful way. The end, right? So actually, there's tons of stuff happening, but most of it is not really relevant ever. And so what we're doing, we're gradually getting better at saying what's relevant. So at the beginning of life, you had probably RNA came before DNA. So you have these particles that got arranged in a particular way. Maybe it's because the universe moves in that direction. Maybe it's because it happened randomly. I think it's one and not the other, right? But RNA moves into DNA. DNA, if you think about it in a really abstract sense, DNA is an information storage system. It stores information about organisms and builds them in a certain way to move and feed and reproduce, right? So life is getting more complex. It's getting better with dealing with this information, right? The die are falling. It's being stored in the form of DNA. So I think DNA and even RNA and potentially organic molecules are actually a form of this kind of information storage. And I think consciousness, as we experience it, is a higher level of maybe lower levels of consciousness that are going on with animals. They certainly have a different form of consciousness, right? Like dogs clearly respond to stimuli. They have memories. They have emotions. Maybe, like crabs, technically lobsters have like it's the same brain chemistry as we do. They have serotonin. They can be sad and depressed. They can be happy, right?
Oh, have
So
you
like
read
all this
the
stuff,
crab stuff by Peterson?
Peterson, the
Yeah,
lobster stuff.
the
Yeah.
lobster, yeah,
Basically, right.
lobster stuff. That's great.
But that's
Does
the thing. Like we've had this shit forever. And so we think because we think conceptually that we're the only things that are conscious, it's like, no, actually, all of that stuff is conscious. It's just conscious in much less complex forms. It's dealing with less complex information. So is a dog sitting here thinking about like what constitutes the essence of a tree? No. A dog is like, hey, I'm going to go pee on that tree because I'm marking my territory because that's how I feel like it, right? So this is the thing. When you think about human consciousness, we think like, oh, humans have been around for a couple million years or whatever. And human societies maybe been around for 10,000, 20,000. People debate this. Maybe it's been around for longer in different forms. Recorded history is not that old, right? Well, that's
Garrett,
cool. Yeah.
can I tell you that explanation you did with the example in chat? That was really, really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
never heard somebody say it that way, you know. But I want to ask you a question. So,
Mhm.
what do you think about AI and who will be like who is owning the AI? What you described perfectly makes sense, but AI might be a powerful tool, you know, and
It's
who can keep control
extremely
over it?
powerful. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. It's like my concern with AI is not that, like, let's say Tabalo is a normal ethical AI engineer who understands, like, hey, this is a really useful tool for parsing data, right? I have no concern that Tabalo doing his job normally and just trying to like find ways to analyze data better is ever going to accidentally make something that like kills everyone. It's not going to happen, right? What I am concerned about is that people who do not understand that AI is not conscious are going to try and make AI act like it's conscious, right? If you make AI act like it's conscious, then you're programming it to be irrational, to act like a human, to pretend like have fake feelings. Like you can have like if you tell GPT-3, right, you're like, hey, write me a sad story, write me a happy story. Okay. Now you tell GPT-3, like, hey, I'm gonna make a clone of this and I'm gonna change the parameters. You say, you're going to interact with everyone you meet and pretend to have emotions, right? Or you're going to pretend to have be vengeful, or pretend to like hold a grudge, or pretend to you could write an AI that is designed to study someone's history and cyberbully them into suicide, right? That's what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
scared of.
exactly.
People who make it like a person, because it can't be fundamentally like a person. It can just be like a sociopath or a psychopath. It doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have empathy, it doesn't actually have human qualities. But if you make it pretend to, then you make something really dangerous, because then it's lying to people, it's fooling people, and you can easily avoid this. You can render yourself immune to this by realizing it is not a person or like a person at all, right? If you remember that and you're talking to the AI, then you realize, oh, someone programmed this thing to be mean to me. Someone programmed this thing to harass me. And frankly, those are going to be bigger problems. You could write a script now, probably, that just makes fake accounts that are plausible on every single social media platform and
I
targeted
wanted to say
does
that.
targeted harassment. Yeah, you could do it. So, but that's the thing. It's not like, oh no, a killer AI just happened. It's like somebody out there who's an asshole just made a machine to bully people into killing themselves, right? That's a much more likely concern than like, oh no, we were just trying to do data analysis on fintech SaaSes and then it came to life and shot nukes. It's like that is not how anything works. Nothing works like that. You don't like that would be like, imagine if we're like, imagine a million years ago, if DNA is doing its thing, and then suddenly it mutates and like does something into like it suddenly mutates and like solves all the chess problems and then uses them to kill everything on the planet. Like, it's not the AI. We think it's complicated because people are complicated and it's drawing from all of this like art and writing and other stuff, but it doesn't know things. It doesn't know, there's not a thing in there that knows. It can store things that other people said, it can write new stuff with things that other people put together, but it's not like sitting there quietly in a room by itself and coming up with new ideas. It's just doing what it's designed to do, and the way it's designed, it's not exactly clear how it gets there, but the initial conditions, the programming of the machine in itself, lead it to work the way that it works, right? Whereas humans, I mean, that's the thing, even if humans are like machines, we just happen to have billions of years of training data from, probably millions of different kinds of organisms that are our predecessors, right? You have apparently the same neurological chemicals as a lobster. And I think we diverged from lobsters maybe millions of years ago, maybe billions of years ago. I don't know, a long time, right? So it's like hundreds of millions, I think, probably. But you just have so much data and so many, like every version of something that is your like beta test, the millions and millions of beta tests, if it did not survive, it died, right? And every single one managed to reproduce itself. So you have just infinitely more data, a way, way, way more complex system that actually deals with the real world. GPT-3 doesn't have the ability to move. It doesn't have the ability to interact with the reality. They have those Boston Dynamics robots, which are pretty cool and honestly scarier than the AI, because they can like open doors and you can strap a gun to it and just say, hey, do use the face detect camera and shoot everything that has a face. And guess what? It's not because the AI is bad. It's because somebody made a weapon, right, that kills people
Exactly.
indiscriminately.
So
That's why I told you about the control thing. So if
Right.
somebody would have control over this, which is very unlikely, but if that would
Oh no,
happen,
no,
then
it's super likely. The government definitely has the ability to make a drone. Like it could be a flying drone that you can't even see. It flies at 60,000 feet. You would never be able to know it's there, and it could drop super sophisticated bombs on you by using a super high magnification camera to like track your movements or look at your face, or hey, actually, we can tell based on the heat signatures this is a 23-year-old male or this is a 85-year-old woman, that she has a lower body temperature and like is a smaller signature on the radar. Like, that's not a fantasy. This exists. It's only going to get worse. And again, the problem isn't that AI is bad. Is the problem is that the people who built it are malicious or have ill intent. So we are not where people are like AI is going to be all this. It's like, no, people are going to use AI to do all of this stuff, and then we'll say it's the AI, so we don't have to like deal with the ethical implications of like, hey, we made a machine that kills people when it looks at their face, right? Hey, this dog robot has 24 hours of charge and it can work in the rain and the snow and freezing temperatures or blistering heat, and it can run around with a gun strapped to it and shoot people when it wants to because we built it like that, right? But it's never, unless someone builds a machine that introduces randomness into its own programming, it still happens because people designed it to do that. And even if it introduces randomness, it's like saying, hey, I designed a self-driving car that randomly drives off the road and hits people, right? Like, you still built it. It still came from us, right? It's still our doing. So this is where, when people think that it can think, they're saying, I am no longer going to think. I'm going to take my own intentionality, my own responsibility for this, and put it inside of this black box that I built or that someone else built, right? And I don't necessarily expect the average person to understand this stuff because they're not the ones building the AI. But anyone who's smart enough to build AI, and Michelangelo can say this, should be smart enough to understand the basic concepts of like, um, consciousness and ethics, and especially AI ethics. Like, that should be straightforward, and they're definitely smart enough to do it. They just, people think about it very very much in the wrong way.
I think, if I may there, thank you, everyone. First of all, thank you, Garrett. It was very nice chat, the one I heard. The one we heard, let's say, from so-called whistleblowers are people who want to drive attention to themselves. They found the opportunity. They said, okay, well, perhaps I can make a career out of this and I can become famous because I said that AI has gaining consciousness. And then the other thing they keep claiming, basically, to assess the consciousness of an AI is the Turing test. And I'm very, very critical of the Turing test. And for one reason is because Turing basically started with an assumption. You cannot use statistics to map, to emulate human language. That assumption, but his assumption was basically during the World War. So how do you say, it's like, and being an assumption so early, like nobody thought that simple statistics could be used for NLP, for example. And then we figure out, okay, with sufficient data and statistics, we can actually emulate a human language. He thought it was something so complex that if you were fooling a human, then like the structure you built for just language itself would have been so complex that would have been assessed, that would have been considered consciousness. Now we know it's not the case because, for example, GPT-3, the way it works is essentially called sequence to sequence. And what it does is you take a sequence of words, and then the computer is a language model trying to create another sequence of words. So it's a simple statistical model. And the layers that you have, like just to tell you how stupid it is. Stupid is how simple it is. Let's say, for example, like the warrior slay the dragon. Okay, in our head, the warrior slay the dragon has a ton of conceptual layers. We imagine the thing in 3D, we imagine the story, we feel the emotion about something slaying the dragon. There is a significance to us. For the AI, each word is represented as a token, as a number, plain number, and then you output the probability of the next word. So if for sudden we say the warrior slay the dragon pizza, okay, because the AI is not trained well enough, that that is okay for the language model. There is no other understanding but plain probability. And so the notion that something like this could be conscious or sentient, something like this, it's like you do not have to articulate it in more complex way. Just because you know the complexity and the architecture of the software, no matter how complex the architecture, but you already know its limitation on a conscious basis.
So,
Yeah, that's a
so,
really good explanation.
so my only problem with this line of reasoning, and I agree with everything you guys are saying, is in the sense that people can't sort of forfeit their agency and critical thinking because AI can do everything better and faster than them, at least in analysis or just output or whatever. And that's not exactly true either. There's been a lot of like where you see it make very silly mistakes, and like you need human intelligence to like modify it, especially with like programming and code stuff. But my only problem with the line of reasoning is that I think like us as a species of humans is like we have a hubris to like be overconfident in our judgment, and that kind of like gives us a hubris of like, okay, you know, we are the highest form of intelligence we know, therefore we are the highest form of consciousness that is known, therefore if it's not higher than us then it's basically not consciousness. And that's kind of the thinking here. So it's like when we're talking about conscious and knowing, I kind of fall more in the cap like, okay, all things in the universe are conscious to varying degrees of, you know, I guess stimulation or knowing. I think there's a certainly some spectral aspect to it. But
Is it no, it's very interesting how you think, because basically you are saying, okay, perhaps we need to draw a line, right, where the consciousness begins. You say if there is no specific line of consciousness, which is true in the sense it's very difficult to define it as well. I think there was a movie that is called Transcendence with Johnny Depp. Not a great hit, but it talks about that specifically. You say, well, you cannot define consciousness, so if you can fool a human, that's sufficient. And so I think the way to articulate your thought, which is not bad, it's basically saying, you know, you cannot draw a minimum line of consciousness. So why can't a worm or even a cell be conscious on itself, on its own basis? Because, you know, I think we need to be very specific on that, because even AI, let's say, you know, it's a process that just gets inputs and outputs. What is the difference from a cell, let's say, that gets an input and output of, let's say, material? And how is the consciousness differ from the both of them? I think the way to address this is to actually define a minimum, like a minimum line of which where consciousness starts and consciousness, well, not necessarily end, but please.
so
I agree with that in theory, but the fundamental problem of consciousness is that consciousness is subjective. And I don't mean subjective as in like we can all say it's different stuff. I mean, the experience of being conscious is a subjective experience, and no amount of science, no amount of math, of AI logic, can touch. Like, you cannot share your subjective experience with other people at all. Nobody can jump inside your head, because consciousness is fundamentally subjective. It is fundamentally experiential, right? It's a thing that you, who happens to exist, happens to be experiencing. And it's not like that doesn't come out of anywhere. I would say, like, honestly, I would, if we're going to go really crazy, I'm not going to say these are loose theories, right? I'm not saying this is true or not, but I would argue that your consciousness is actually the combination of your parents' consciousness, right? It's that your literal, like, cellular makeup is half of their DNA and half of each other's DNA, right? So I would say that consciousness is inherited. There's an I forget who it was. I think it was Schopenhauer. I don't like Schopenhauer. He's a raging awful misogynist and just a general miserable bastard. But one of the things, I think it was him. It may have been a different. It may have been Wittgenstein or something like that. But his idea was that you inherit certain parts of your brain from your father and certain parts from your mother. And this kind of makes sense to me, because it's like, if you look at the way that the universe or life works, you have two things that make a new thing, and then they make more things, and those things combine and they make new things. And this is a trend. In philosophy is called the Hegelian dialectic, where you have thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? The synthesis then produces a new thesis, which makes a new antithesis, and it reproduces, right? And it's like, that's the way that everything works. Everything follows that pattern of separation and coming together. It's the basic, there's self and other, there's light and dark, there's masculine, feminine, there's hot and cold, there's pairs of opposites that work together to do stuff, and the universe stays in this balanced state, right? Push
What
and
if
pull, even.
Okay, so what if instead of because as you said, and you're right with that, you know, it's so personal consciousness that, you know, you cannot assess this in an objective way. What instead we work on, but we could say that there are physical presupposition, physical, let's say, requirements for having a consciousness. So, for example, a rock cannot be conscious. Why? It does not have any
What
biological, right?
I mean, maybe it is though. Maybe it just doesn't have like it doesn't seem to have sense organs, but it could be that particles themselves have the most basic sort of consciousness because you have to like think about the universe in the grand scheme of things. We went from having no apparent consciousness to having consciousness. So either it was created from nothing, which I disagree with. I think that contradicts everything we know about like the Newtonian physics, thermodynamics, or it was always there and it's something that arranges itself into increasingly complex forms. So I think the nature of reality is fundamentally consciousness, right? Now, I don't mean that I'm not, so a lot of people say stuff like that and then they go and say, oh, everything is mind, everything's an illusion. I'm not a Gnostic like that. I don't think that it's literally just a projection in your head. I don't think that's the case. I think rather than that, the universe, both the physical matter of the world, rocks and dirt and shit, and consciousness, the subjective, so the objective and the subjective, are inseparable. They're different, but you can't have one without the other. And we can run this through a really simple thought experiment and kind of prove that that's the case. So let's imagine we have two universes, right? One universe has only matter, there's no life in it whatsoever. Okay, can you prove that that universe exists? No, you can't. Why can't you prove that it exists? Because you need an observer, a consciousness, to look at it and say, here is a thing. Okay, so it's irrelevant. It may exist, but there's no way that we could ever know that it exists because the second that you step into it, that universe would have consciousness and life in it, right? So it's completely irrelevant whether or not it exists. It's outside of meaning because without an observer to assign meaning to, it can't have meaning. It's meaningless, right? Similarly, universe number two, we have a consciousness that exists, but there's no matter at all. You have a consciousness that's floating in the void. It doesn't, there's nothing for it to look at or see. There's nothing, see, smell, taste, touch, feel, whatever. There's no matter at all. It's a disembodied consciousness floating in the void. Does it exist? I don't know. Can it think? Maybe even if it had the ability to think, it can't think about anything. There's nothing to think about. There's nothing to experience. It can't know because there's nothing to know, right? So, does it? Is it possible
So
that it could exist?
hold on,
It's
hold on.
irrelevant.
So when you get in this realm of like nothingness and this like etherealness and the unconscious,
This
like
wouldn't be unconscious. This would be non-conscious. That's the difference, right?
but
Unconscious implies there is a consciousness and there's something you don't know about, right? I'm unconscious about what the cells in my feet are doing right now, but I could be conscious about them if I really thought about it, right? I could direct my consciousness to analyze the cells in my big toe.
so my
So it's
problem.
unconscious to me now.
So we do these things as humans, and we it's commonly done with pets, and I talk with my dog about it. But like people are like, oh, the dog, like they're trying to
That's
like
great.
project human emotions and human thinking to the animal's thinking. So they're like, oh, the dog's happy, sad, or that. No, the dog or the cat, they think like a dog or a cat. They don't think like a human. Um,
But we have
so
the same neurochemistry
you
to
can't
follow.
project human perception on external or just even a different creature or species in
No, but you
general.
have to look within the scope. I'm saying within the scope of this argument, if you have theoretically a consciousness existing with no matter whatsoever, with nothing there, how could you form a thought? A thought like, so for example, let's say it wants to talk about a tree. There are no trees in this universe. There are no particles in this universe. There's nothing to think about, to talk about. You subjective consciousness and objective reality have to exist together because you can't have one without the other. They're separate but inseparable. They're distinct but require each other to exist. And this is where the AI argument falls apart because we're saying we can create part of this equation without the other parts of it, right? Out of nothing, right? And technically be creating out of ourselves and something like that. But the subjective consciousness is not going to appear because it's always been here. And this is my big argument against like the Big Bang is like, if I told you, hey, I have a perpetual motion machine, right? Anyone who knows, if you don't know this, perpetual motion machines, lots of inventors try to make them. They are physically impossible because they violate the laws of entropy, right? Meaning a machine, like if you have a ball that rolls down a hill and a magnet that pulls it back up the hill and it rolls down again, in reality, if the ball rolls down the hill and the magnet is strong enough to pull it up the hill, the ball can't roll down the hill. If the magnet is not strong enough to pull it up the hill, it rolls down the hill and it never moves again, because you can't get free energy. You can't make stuff from nothing. You can't keep it going forever. So where did the universe come from? Is it more likely, knowing what we know about physics, you can't get something from nothing? Is it more likely that the universe suddenly appeared and sprang into existence, or that it's always existed and it just recycles? If energy and matter can neither be created nor destroyed, it was always here. Okay. If consciousness is somehow made up of energy and matter, or maybe it isn't, maybe it's some other thing, is it more likely that it sprang into existence or that it always existed? And then you just can go.
That was
Occam's
Stephen
razor.
Hawking's assumption, correct?
So, but
I don't know that it
but
is.
Garrett,
A lot of the scientists really don't believe consciousness is real. But again, don't quote me on that. I'm not that
but
fluent in Hawking.
they also believe like physical reality is ultimate reality, and so they dismiss a lot of either like spiritual intelligence or just local or non-physical phenomena. So Garrett, so my only problem with what you're saying is like it's like, all right, we're very confident these are facts about nature and objective via physics. But to me, it's more likely physics doesn't have the right understanding than nature being wrong, right?
Well,
So
agreed. This is why I would say that people think that, because the big delusion, and I've talked about this 100 times at Philosophy Club, the big delusion, the thing that everyone fucked up, is thinking that by rationality, by reason alone, you can understand everything. Reason can only understand the objective, right? If I have this little like hacky sack thing, right? I can sit here, if I'm Newton, right? I can sit here and throw this up and see that it comes down and understand everything in the world about how this works. What I can't understand, and I can even write the math that tells you, hey, this is like mass with acceleration equals velocity, right? But what you can't understand and you can't do the math for is, why am I even able to see this at all? You could do the math for light, but that doesn't tell you who's seeing the light, right? Are you just a clump of cells that happens to be oriented in this way? Well,
yes.
maybe, but that doesn't disprove that there's a subjective thing that you can't touch that's called experience. It's called being. It's called isness. It's consciousness, right?
Okay,
so
so that goes back to like
science is only capable of dealing with the objective. You can't, if it's subjective, you can't measure it. So science can't touch it. So because they can't touch it, they treat it like it's not real. And that delusion is the central delusion of modernity. Everybody thinks that only the things that we can prove with science are real. There are plenty of things that you can prove. Like everyone who has ever loved knows love is real. Can you prove that someone's in love with math? You can measure like elevated oxytocin levels. Does that tell you anything about the experience of being in love? Can you measure meaning? No. Can you make meaning with like a factory, or can you touch it? No. Do people provably care more about meaning than they do about factory work? Yes. I was a factory worker. I can tell you that's the truth, right? It's you like there is a subjective component to life. It exists, and science is uncomfortable, or rather, people who ascribe the solution to all problems with science are uncomfortable with the fact that there is half of life that is subjective and can't ever be measured. It can't ever be quantified, and it's experiential, right? It doesn't matter if you have all the theory in the world. You can understand the theory for how to drive a car, and then you get in the car and crash it in 5 minutes. I don't know if you like everyone went to driving school. The first time you get in the car, even though you heard all this shit, it's still hard to drive a car, right? Theory and practice in a perfect world would be united because you would learn them both at the same time. But in reality, there are a lot of theoretical physicists that have never interacted with any of the shit that they're talking about. And because you can't measure consciousness, you can't have like a scientific theory of consciousness. So it's excluded from science. And you could look at the behaviorists who were psychologists through much of the 1900s who basically said, hey, we are going to do psychology as if consciousness doesn't exist at all. So if I tase Tabalo, a behaviorist would say taser input equals pain action output, right? He tenses up, he screams, He sweats, his heart rate elevates, his cortisol spikes, his adrenaline dumps, right? Like all of these things happen. But there, according to the behaviorist, there's nothing in there that's experiencing pain. If I shock you, Tabalo, you know what pain feels like. You can't show me that, but you could tase me too, and I could know it, right? And
So
that experience can't be quantified. It can't be measured no matter how hard we try, because that's the nature of subjectivity, which is real. And people, when they say consciousness is an illusion, they're trying to say subjectivity isn't real. And it's like, what the fuck is the point of you doing science, dumbass? Like, you exist. Stop trying to pretend like you don't. Live in the world. It's here. It's happening. And people have debated this for like the entire history of humanity. But when you start dealing with the fact that subjectivity is real, you start realizing, man, the way we live our lives is kind of stupid, right? We spend all this time focusing on the objective, the acquisition of money and goods and bigger and nicer things, but you can't buy subjective things. You can't make someone love you with any amount of money. Ask Jeff Bezos, right? He clearly, no matter like being one of the richest men alive, he still ended up with that gold digger lady, and he had this woman who loves him. And guess what? You could buy a gold digger, you can't make them love you, no matter what, right? So there are things that money can't buy. And when people realize this, the way that the world works starts to fall apart, because the world is based on this idea that only objective things exist, right?
so I like on the philosophy side of this, like when you talk to scientists, and especially when you start saying, okay, like God, quantum, non-local, all these things, like a lot of scientists don't believe in God, and
Well, yeah, because God relies on subject. If there's no consciousness, there's no God. It's just a bunch of rocks that happen to move and shit. It's
Ri-
dust that.
so it's like this principled living of like there's nothing more, right? Uh, and it's bizarre because I think our sense and intuition is like we get that inkling and we get the like we can sense like and especially when you start understanding like clairvoyance and sensory perception and stuff like that, like there's clearly more. It's very obvious there's more, and it's hard to rationalize things because
There,
it's basically
there
saying
it
if you
goes again.
can't
No,
see it
you're
with your
trying
eyes.
to rationalize something that is post-rational. It's non-rational, right?
But you
Subjectivity
can't
is not rational.
but they try to use their eyes to rationalize it. Like they're literally like, okay, if I can't see it or touch it, it's not real. And that's like the judgment. And
That's the delusion, yeah. But that's the thing. They can't see it or touch it, but who's seeing it and touching it, right? It's not your body, right? Who's the observer who's coming up with these ideas? Like that's the thing. People have no awareness of the internal consciousness that they have that exists. And because of that, because they don't know that, they get everything else wrong. But that's the most basic fact. In Buddhism and Hinduism, they call it like the Atman or the Brahman, which is like being. In Christianity, they call it the Holy Spirit. In Gnosticism, they call it like the clear light. In Kabbalah, they call it Ein Sof. In Sufi Islam, they would probably just call it Allah. I don't know if they probably have a name for consciousness I'm not familiar with, but all the religions are religion is science that attempts to deal with subjective problems, right? And then this is the thing, people think religion is, hey, here's a bunch of rules for how you to live your life, and God wants you to do this, and if you don't do it, he doesn't like you. It's like, no. Well, it became that. But religion, like Buddhism or even yoga, actually is the best example. Yoga, what yoga is not like, hey, I'm going to do a bunch of poses and get fit, right? Yoga is actually a very robust discipline that they call spiritual science. It's a, hey, if you do this stuff exactly the way that we tell you to do it, we've done this for 10,000 years, you are going to get the result, which is learning about yourself, learning about the nature of yourself with a capital S, right? But this is the thing, science and religion, or science and spirituality, are not opposed to each other. One deals with the objective, one deals with the subjective, but you are both and you need both. Should you trust yoga to drive your car? No, that doesn't make any sense. That's a stupid thing to think of, right? Should you trust science to tell you about consciousness? No, probably not, because you have consciousness and science doesn't, right? You have one that you need to figure out yourself. but it's yours and it's subjective. And people want to work in groups, and people want to like outsource thinking to other people because it's scary and it's uncomfortable, and you have to like realize that you were raised a certain way and you have these things that you believe that are wrong, and it's painful to be wrong, and it's hard to like deal with this stuff and deal with the implications and realize, oh my god, like when you start realizing stuff, you're like, oh my god, everybody's wrong about tons of stuff, and they don't realize it. And not only do they not realize it, you can't like do the math, and most people just want to see like, oh, is there a study for that? It's like, how do you study
Is
consciousness?
it
You
peer
study
reviewed?
your
Yeah.
consciousness.
Yeah, is it
Right.
like, is it peer reviewed? Is it freaking, so where I think personally where I try to like fight this fight is when it comes to mental health, and like how they attribute a solution to like think about curing mental health. How do you like cure someone's mind, so to say? Um so if you ask like a psychiatrist or psychologist or these same type of scientist personas, the logic is that it's just in your brain. It's your neurochemistry. Uh and if you just take a pharmaceutical or something that targets chemistry, then you can resolve it and mitigate the issue. Now anyone
Which
listening
again,
or the people here, like, it's like putting a band-aid on cancer. It's like short-term solution in the sense it'll suppress the activity, but it doesn't do anything about the root cause. So when you dig into the root cause, you're saying, okay, what is the mind or consciousness and with the brain? And the whole like medical establishment is about, mental health. It's only in your brain. And they can't explain how medicine would work if you're dropped in a war zone environment, or if you're just grown up in poverty, or if you deal with external stimuluses that are going to change your neurochemistry no matter what sort of pharmaceutical you take. So it's like it doesn't integrate the external. It says it's just a brain imbalance. And then also there's no balanced brain. They don't have an example of a balanced brain other than like social, the status quo of like social dynamics, right?
well,
So
so they recently disproved the chemical imbalance theory of mental illness. This was it should have been bigger news because they've been peddling this shit for fucking 20 years plus, where basically science said sometime, I don't know, 80s or 90s, whatever, they said, if you have mental illness, it's because you have a chemical imbalance, right? As a result, they invented antidepressants and other chemicals like SSRIs,
the
MAOI.
DSM-5, that's all it's basically
Right.
what
It's
it is.
here's
Yeah.
a list of chemical imbalances, right? Basically, they've proved that this is not the case. That these chemicals aren't actually like your brain chemicals aren't imbalanced. Now, people with different kinds of mental conditions do have wildly different brain chemistry, but it's not imbalanced, right? You can't. If I go to the doctor and say I'm impressed, yeah, Samantha, look it up. I can't. I have to run very shortly, so I'm trying to wrap this up neatly. But look up chemical imbalance theory of mental illness or depression disproved. It was relatively big news a little while ago. Not big enough, but so you go to the doctor and say, "Hey, doctor, I'm depressed," and he says, "Here, take this chemical," right? Well, why are you depressed, right? Oh, well, actually, doctor, I work a dead end job, and my kids are on drugs, and my wife is a hooker, and also there's my wife's pimp comes and beats the shit out of me once a week for no reason, and I can't afford shit because the economy is bad, and I'm uneducated, so
More
I don't know how to solve these
SSRIs.
problems. Yeah, but then you realize, oh wait, you're saying that mental illness is the result of subjective things. It's a result of the actual story of your life being bad. It's not like, oh, we can fix this, because the scientific establishment does not act like subjective consciousness is real. If subjective consciousness is real, you say, hey, guess what? Maybe you have some unresolved trauma with your mom. Maybe you have to go make peace with the people in your life. Maybe being mad at people and holding grudges is bad. Maybe you're in an abusive relationship and you have to accept that you deserve better, right? Those aren't problems that pills solve. Pills barely solve any problems, right? Like, do you have a staph infection? We could give you like antibiotics. but like you don't have a staph infection in your mind. The brain and the mind are not the same thing. Otherwise, you could just like poke people's brains and make them be different people, and it doesn't work like that. The mind seems to exist, right? We are, my experience, I don't know about anyone else, but I certainly have a mind, and I certainly have the experience of subjective consciousness, right? Like I'm choosing to throw this around because I like to have fidget toys. I have a bunch of them laying around, right?
I just think it's a very important fight for me because it's like very depressing when you realize, especially like the older generation, they're like, oh no, the solution is just some pharmacological product. It's like, no, this is like, it's like the essence of like self transformation and growth to be able to like like that shadow of your mind and how it relates to your like physical nature. It's like it's a very, it's not easy, but it's like that's the conversation. It's not like, oh, just act like all these other things don't exist and then pretend and then pay all these people shitloads of money to just not basically waste your fucking time. So
To wrap up, because I got to run. I have a meeting in like 3 minutes. To wrap up, as soon as you accept that your subjective experience, your consciousness is real, then everything in your life is capable of getting much better. If you don't act like it's real and you look for solutions outside of yourself, like pills, drugs, whatever, you are always going to have the problems that you have. But when you realize that your consciousness exists, that you're conscious, you can make decisions, you can change the way that things work, you can learn about yourself and get better, then you have the power to improve your life, and you have the power to be a responsible person in society, right? Like you are an agent, you have agency, you can do things, you can make decisions, you can learn, you can get better at stuff, right? But if you don't act like it's real, then you're wrong, and B, everything will get worse, and you'll keep finding reasons that aren't you for why things aren't working out the way that you want them to. But when you are acting like it's real and you work on yourself and you seek out opportunities and you improve yourself and all these things, then your life will keep getting better because the universe wants consciousness to improve. You can say God wants you to self-actualize. You could say it's some other kind of spiritual thing. I don't care what you call it. It does not matter. It's just the universe makes consciousness, and consciousness, the job of consciousness is to become more conscious. When you're conscious, you have more power in reality, and you have power over your own life and power to improve the lives of others, right? Anyone who wants to tell you consciousness isn't real is insane and probably wants you to give them money or support their delusions. So that's all for today. I got to run right now, but super good talk.
Well said.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Garrett.
Hey, thank you very much for hosting this.
As always,
thanks for coming out.
As always, a great discussion with Garrett. So if you guys want to come, am I muted? Oh no, I'm not. If you guys want to come to the next event here, I just
can anyone hear Sam? I can't hear Sam. Hey guys, can you?
No, very funny, very funny. I'm gonna show non-video participants just so people can see who else is in here right now. A few people have headed out already. We're just wrapping up, but I will drop this next one. Copy link. Next event. Add to your calendar. And if you're on the Twitch, make sure you head into discord.gg/triba to check out all the different workshops we have. We got Monday a live stream workshop with BU. Tuesday we got productivity and mental health. Wednesday we got philosophy club, which you were just part of, and then on Friday, well, we also have a information roundtable with Tabalo later in his server. And Thursdays then are workshop for social media and marketing and stuff like that. So check out the different events. Interested, click that little interested button and make sure you share it with somebody who also needs this kind of collaborative information decentralization, to put it in Tabalo terms, the Yeet terms. Tabalo has he's got a round table every Wednesday at 6 Eastern time. So that is also in there. The link for that.
What's a round table?
It's just like this, basically what we just did, a different name for it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's all for the stream today, guys. Thank you for joining us. And as always, we love having everybody here. Drop some feedback if you want, but we're looking to improve the stream too. So if you want to do something with us, hit me up on Discord. Have a nice day.